My objective here is to walk you through VMware, and I'm going to be breaking it down 50 minutes, approximately 50 minutes at a time. I'm going to do 3 sets, almost 3 sets. There's going to be a lot of information, and I'm going to be using Windows as my OS example, as my virtual machine OS example. It's okay if you don't understand completely what I'm doing, especially if you're not familiar with VMware. It's going to happen. How many of you use VMware in some way, shape, or form? Most of them. Kind of, yeah. How many of you guys have created VMware structure from scratch in your organization? Okay, I'm just going to bore you. Thanks.
I'm here for the new features in 5.5.
Yeah.
That's one of the things.
Yeah, so I'm going to be talking to you about VMware and as it has progressed over time. There are few things that you want to note about, specifically about version 5.5. There are many of them, but there are great enhancements over the 5.1 and releases prior to that. And I want to list these, actually. I love Notepad. I don't know why. I think it probably has something to do with the fact that Notepad's got low overhead, and I like anything that has low overhead.
Especially at Windows,
Right? Wind blows, doesn't work, station. No. So in version 5.5, first thing that I like, as we're talking about VMs anyway, specifically about VMs. In version 5.5, VMs are allowed 64 terabytes of storage. You can assign a single VM 64 terabyte storage. That's 5.5 and later. 5.1, you're able to assign 2 terabyte virtual disk. Right? Isn't that amazing? Also, in 5.5, you can assign a VM 2 terabytes of RAM. Whoa! Today, I work with servers that have 1.6, 1.7 terabytes of RAM on a single box. And I think it's just a matter of time before 2 terabytes of RAM shows up at Walmart for $10. You know what I mean? Some of the things that were completely out of reach financially are like, you know, child's play now. 6, 8 gig, 32. I bought a 512 gig USB flash drive on eBay. 512 gig, half a terabyte for $42. And it actually works. So, big change there. Also, this is something I want to show you on the web. If I go to here and I look up, you got to see this because otherwise you won't believe me. So here's a resource management guide for 4.1. And here's a resource management guide for 5.5. And I'm going to look up memory overhead. I'm going to show you something. So this is version 4.1, okay? This is version 4.1. And in version 4.1, if you allocated 256 megs of RAM to a virtual machine with one virtual processor, the virtual machine and, well, the VMware vSphere 4.1 would eat up as much as 113.17 meg on top of 256. And if you allocated it with 8 processors, it would eat up 416 meg on top of the already 256 megs of RAM. And if you go take that way down, if you allocate 256 gigs of RAM and you assigned it 8 processors, it would eat up an additional 10 gig on top. This is version 4.1. Now in version 5.5, should take a look at this. Look at that. 256 meg, one processor, 20 more megs of RAM. Look at that. Look at the difference. Look at the difference. 113 meg more, 20 meg more. Go down to 16 gig and 8 processors. 16 gig and 8 processors eat up 168.6 more megs of RAM. Here, 16 gig and 8 processors eats up, whoa, almost a gig more of RAM. So if you go from 4x to 5.5, you have an instantaneous benefit from a RAM resource utilization perspective, as long as you upgrade your virtual hardware. Well, and you would. Why wouldn't you? Huge difference. Huge difference. And there are great performance differences as far as 5.5 goes as well. In 5.5, hi, I'm Rafiq.
Yes. I'm sorry, I'm late.
No problem. Your voice is being recorded. This is for permanent record. Max is late. In vSphere 5X, they introduced a Linux vCenter server appliance. And of course, you already had access to the Windows vCenter appliance. Now, in this demonstration that I'm going to be doing, I'm using the Linux-based vCenter server appliance for a few reasons. One, it's a next finish installation, and it takes about 10 minutes total. Two, vCenter server appliance in 5.5 over the 5.1 and 5.0 releases has great benefits. One, in version 5.5, vCenter server appliance supports VMware View. How many of you are familiar with VMware View? That's the VDI product, the the virtual desktop infrastructure product that is competing with Citrix and Microsoft's VDI structure. So it will support vCenter server appliance, and 5.5 supports VMware View, which wasn't the case before. Also, in vCenter server 5.5 with the Linux appliance, it fully supports the web interface, which wasn't as friendly in older releases in vCenter server appliance. The web interface, for those of you that don't know, is the way VMware is going. The thick client interface, the thick client user interface, is going to go away. And I don't know when. I think version 6. Anybody else know?
Are they continuing on with using Flash?
As far as I know, yes. I'm not an authority. I'm always reading about these things. I do have ins with VMware. I know some people, but they tell me what they're able to tell me. I don't think they expose anything but if I had to guess, I would say yes, they would continue to use Flash. If they switch over to HTML5, but that's their structure right now. They'd have to completely revamp their web interface, which I doubt they're going to do for a release. Maybe they will at some time in the future. The Windows vCenter appliance has a few benefits. One, if you've been using the Windows appliance, the Windows vCenter appliance, you've been tied to SQL Server as your back-end database. And you've been consistently upgrading from, 4x, I suppose, from that point forward. There's a big downside to that. And the downside is, and maybe you are part of that downside when you are looking at your own organization, when you go from the first iteration of some things to 6 iterations later, and you've upgraded the whole time, you carry a lot of crap with you. Is that true with you too? It's not just me, right? You configure things not so the right way because you don't really know, and then as time progresses, you learn and you learn and you learn, and then you fix and you Band-Aid and you patch and you fix and you Band-Aid, but a lot of the crap is coming along with you. So many of the organizations that I work with that are on the Windows vCenter appliance side have gone the SQL Server route and continue to upgrade from the old to the new one, but their vCenter server and their SQL Server side is bloated. Now, what I mean by bloated is it's 20, 30 gig, whoopity-da-doo, but it's not clean. It doesn't eat up a lot of resources. They archive stuff away, but the clustering structure, the user permission structure, who they did and did not give permissions to, many people that they have given permissions to on the Windows vCenter server side still have permissions when the employees no longer exist, which is a boo-boo. It's a security boo-boo. And today it's probably a security hole, PII, right? So also the Windows vCenter server appliance has the negative side that you need a Windows Server license and a SQL Server license. For many organizations, that is not a problem, right? Because they already have it. But if I can help it, my reasons for going the Windows vCenter Server Appliance 5.1 and earlier was because of View. I had to tell my clients, if you want to use View, you have no other choice. You have to go the Windows route. But I don't have to tell them that anymore. I can say you can use the Linux-based vCenter Server Appliance, which uses one of two. It either uses an embedded database or it utilizes Oracle. Now, I don't know why people are so hesitant, Windows people are so hesitant to touch Oracle. Oracle, by the way, for those of you that may have played with it in the past, today is much friendlier than it used to be. Oracle has tried their best to include interfaces, to include wizards, which I'm all against, to make Oracle as friendly as possible. You go on the Enterprise Manager on the web, and you're able to click through a lot of things that you weren't able to do before. Oracle setup is much easier and so on. But anyway, Linux vCenter Appliance uses either Oracle or uses an internal embedded database. I use a Linux vCenter Server Appliance, use the embedded database. I use it inside of a virtual machine, which is a virtual appliance, virtual machine, and I back up the VM, and I cluster that VM, and I vMotion it when I need it. You know what I mean? I treat it like a normal box, normal important box, like I would treat Active Directory. So it works great. Not only that, the vCenter Server Appliance is ready for an enterprise, which wasn't the case when they came out with it in version 5.0. Here we are 2 releases later. vCenter Server Appliance, a single vCenter Server Appliance, is capable of managing 4,000 VMs and 200 hosts. That is an enterprise, my friend. So 4,000 VMs and 200 hosts for a single vCenter server. Yeah, you got to assign it more RAM and stuff. I get it. But it works awesome. And the getting the vCenter Server Appliance running, like I said, you just bring the appliance in, you just import an OVF file, you do next, finish, you go to the web interface, next, finish, pretty much, and you're kind of done. It's really not hard, and it requires little to no knowledge of how the vCenter Server Appliance works on your part. The other reason that I like vCenter Server Appliance is because it integrates with Active Directory natively. You are able to open up a vCenter Server Appliance, so let me take you there so you can see what I'm talking about in addition to just talking about it. Where did my, no, here. So here's my close. Now, since it is Linux-based, by the way, I'm going to be doing a lot of things command line. One, because many people that use VMware are Windows people. They're not Linux people because they're managing in the Windows arena. VMware on the back end is all Linux. The more you know about Linux, the more you know how to navigate Linux, the better for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk into the vCenter Server Appliance in an SSH shell. And before I do that, I'm going to open it up. Let me walk you through this really briefly. So this is the default VMware vCenter Server Appliance in version 5.5. And to get to this stage, I had to accept a license agreement, check the box for default setup, and click Next 3 times. I didn't do anything specific here. However, I just want to point out to you, if I go to authentication, Active Directory, all I have to do is check that box, point it to my domain, specify admin user and password. Once I specify admin user and password, I restart the vCenter Server Appliance, which, granted, takes a good 15 minutes this time around. Because what this does is it actually creates a logging database, and it creates some services that have to be started. So the first time you restart it, it takes time. But once you check that box, specify the domain, specify the admin user and password, restart the vCenter Server service, you are now integrated with an AD domain. And oh, by the way, for those of you that are not AD friendly, if you are in LDAP scenario utilizing Novell SUSE or SUSE Linux for that matter, this will work with AD enabled or LDAP enabled services as well. So it doesn't have to be AD, right? AD in these terms really implies LDAP, if you will. Any LDAP compliant directory service will work just fine. I've done it many times over. Also, the other great thing is, although it's kind of old, you see where it says sysprep files here on the bottom right hand corner? I can upload, and I'll show you this piece later on, I can upload for XP, for Windows 2000, XP 64 and 32, for Server 2003, 32 and 64-bit, I can upload sysprep files, the old Windows sysprep files, which allows me to, well, automate the Windows Server 2003 and XP cloning process if I am so bold to have an older OS. In my setup, in what I'm going to be showing you, I have a Server 2003 Windows machine, and I have a Server 2008 R2 64-bit Windows machine. So I'm going to be showing you the sysprep process, even though you may not use it. In Server 2008 R2, in Windows 7 and later, the sysprep process is included as part of the OS. So that's why the files are not here, and you don't have to worry about it. All right? So let me close this. As of version 5, VMware introduced this vSphere auto deploy thing here, right here. Okay? That auto deploy feature, that is actually kind of awesome. I will point you in the direction of the setup, but there's something called auto deploy and image builder. If you want to allow Pixie boot creation of VMware ESXi boxes, which means you boot up the server, you press F12, and down comes the vSphere OS without you doing anything. You can use auto deploy and image builder to get that done. Why would you want to, in your environment, allow for the rebuilding of ESXi servers by a push of a button? Very good question. Let me tell you how I use it. I'm at clients all over the place, and many of them, when I tell them and demonstrate auto deploy and image builder to them, they usually say, Rafiq, I don't have 4,000 servers. I'm not building a new box every minute. But here's the thing. You don't need to build a new box every minute. You need to be, once you've built a box, let's say you build an ESXi box today. How well will you know 6 months down the road how you configured it? I know it's documented and stuff, but how well will you remember what you did? Don't you agree that in 6 months down the road, if you need to rebuild a box, rebuild an ESXi server, that it will take you longer than 10 minutes? Because you got to make sure it jives with the rest of your stuff. With auto deploy and image builder, you can have the configuration, the network configuration built in. And what I mean by network configuration built in, there's something called host profiles. Host profiles is a feature of vSphere 5X and later, 5.0 and later. And that host profiles feature allows you to save network settings, firewall settings, switch settings, you name it. And once you auto-build, auto-deploy a brand new ESXi box, you can apply that host profile setting. And now you've got your server the way you've got your server, and you don't have to do anything. So it helps greatly. You don't need dozens of servers to make this work. The idea here is you're able to build a box. And by the way, when you use auto deploy and image builder, you're going to be refreshing the VMFS volume, only the ESX boot volume, not the VMFS volume. So your data, your virtual machines, your ISOs, whatever you've got on the local drive are going to be saved. Many of the environments I work with don't use local drives. They use SAN devices. So who gives a damn if the local drive is blown away? But even if you want to preserve the local boot, you want to preserve the local OS, and you want to preserve the local data, you can tell this thing to save your VMFS volumes, where your virtual machines are, where your ISOs are, and to completely blow away the OS data. All of that with a push of F12. And if you have it automatically boot up to boot to network, you don't even have to worry about doing that. Very, very cool. And it has methods built in. It requires Power CLI. Power CLI is the network management command line component of vSphere as of version 4X. And you can use with Power CLI, you can say only this MAC address, only this IP address, only this DNS name, only this server name is the one that's going to get the image. So every box can't just boot into it and grab whatever you want. And since it's a Pixie boot scenario, Pixie boots don't do what? They don't cross subnets. And then within those subnets, if you happen to have VLANs, even more secure. So you have a lot of benefits along with that side as well. Now inside of here, if I click on admin, this allows me to change the default password and default admin password. The other thing that you need to do, once you enable Active Directory, as I was showing you over here, once you authenticate and you specify that you want AD and you've restarted it, before you restart it, one of the things that you're going to do when you enable Active Directory is probably you're not going to accept a DHCP address for the vCenter server appliance. Right now, I have a DHCP address associated with this. That's not something you're going to do. You don't want an automatic address assigned to this. You're going to have a DNS name associated with this. You're going to have a static address assigned to this, all of which you're going to configure after the fact. All of which you're going to configure, clickety-click here, and then clickety-click here, and then here's where you would specify, you want a static address, a dynamic address, whatever the case is. Once you do this and you check that box for Active Directory, what you're going to do is you're going to go to admin and you would specify right over here, it says certificate regeneration enabled. You would say yes, you would say submit, and then you would restart the vCenter server appliance. It would create a brand new certificate where it's authenticating Active Directory, and then you'd be good to go completely. So one click here, one click on the Active Directory, specify the admin and the password, and you're good to go. And if you've done the Windows vCenter server setup, you will realize that in the Windows vCenter server setup, you have to configure inventory, vCenter server inventory service, single sign-on service, and the vCenter server itself separately, unless you choose simple installation. And I don't know of most places that choose simple install. With vCenter server appliance, SSO is configured by default right over here. See right here it says where to go. SSO right here. And you will see it says embedded. And you can configure SSO right over here, and you can specify your embedded SSO username and password, and you can specify what account is going to be assigned and where you're going to go. You can do all of this right here. Inside of Windows, this is a complicated thing. Integrating SSO usually requires manual fidgeting with SQL Server. So it's kind of involved. Here, it's not. Also, let me log out of here. Also, since I'm a big fan of Linux, get out. Since I'm a big fan of Linux, and I'm going to make this thing bigger so you guys can see. Go over to change settings, go over to appearance, go over to change this, come on, bold, 24, apply. Okay. So in Linux, for those of you that don't know, you're able to add in users really, really easily. In Windows, you are able to do it using a GUI. Or if you have Active Directory, you can do it using Active Directory users and computers, ADUC. Or you can use DSAdd, DSRemove. I don't know if you've used those tools on the command line. Or you can use PowerCLI to accomplish that task. PowerShell to accomplish that task as well. Most Windows admins that I know are very GUI friendly. If they need to do something that affects or impacts, or they need to impact dozens of users or hundreds of users, changing their passwords, giving them access to a new exchange, whatever the case is, many times they go online hunting for scripts they can use. They'll download the script and then apply it in their test environment without reading it. And then if in their test environment it sort of works, they go ahead and they implement it in production. I've seen it time and again without having to fully understand how the script works. Anybody else in these shoes? Sometimes, have you seen it, where you're downloading a script or using a script that you don't fully understand because you're not really aware of the intricacies of the scripting tool, whatever you want to call it? In Linux and in Windows, by the way, if you're using PowerShell in Windows, if you haven't used PowerShell, you should begin. But if you haven't used PowerShell, begin using it, because in Linux, you're able to add a user just like this. And I'm able to specify the password for the user, like so, and I can specify my password. Bad password, I don't care. And that, just by doing that, I have created a user called Rafiq. Now, here is what the vCenter server appliance looks like when I first walk into it. I don't have any servers here right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a data center. And a data center inside of vCenter is really a logical boundary for hosts to take place. A logical boundary for hosts, and a single data center can house really as many hosts as you want. And inside of a data center, the implication is that one data center has one subnet's worth of hosts. That's not a rule. That's an implied rule. It's not a rigid physical rule. You can stick multiple hosts inside of a data center that are inside of different different subnets. But usually the implication is a single data center is going to have hosts from multiple subnets. I mean, from a single subnet. And I'm going to add my host in here. This one, I think. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. That. Now, this is something that took me a while to actually get used to. The status messages show up on the bottom. If you're not a VMware user, if you're other user, you're going to not look on the bottom for status messages. You're going to be looking somewhere on the main screen, and you're probably going to get lost. So all the status and everything that's going on is happening on the bottom, and that's where you should be looking for any actions that are taking place, tasks and such that are taking place. There's my alarm right there that I probably don't really care about too much. There you go. And that little warning message that's showing up in a yellow exclamation is telling me that I have SSH enabled on that server. Having SSH enabled on that server simply means that I've got a security hole, and that's what it's informing me about. All right. So here I've got my machines. I've got a 2008 R2 server. I have a 2003 box right here, and then I have a vCenter server appliance that's sitting right there. All right. My 2003 box, that's this box right there, I am going to open up my console for 2003 box, and I want to show you a couple of things. I'll log in over here, send Control-Alt-Delete, put in the password, and here's my Windows box, and I'm going to go to Properties, go to the Classic menu, click OK. And I want to check one thing really quick. Right here, right. Okay. All right. So this server 2003 machine, I have given 500. I think I've given a gig of RAM to, and I've allocated this thing 4 gigs of disk space. There are a few things I want to share with you right off the bat. Inside of here, inside of my VMware box, I'm going to open up what's called the data store browser. The data store browser, in my case, is going to browse the local data store right here. And on my local data store, I've got this machine right here, box 00, box 01.0-00, and I'm going to sort these by type. These files right here make up the VM. Now, virtual machines in general are what? Files. I don't care what hypervisor platform you're looking at. And for those of you that don't know, hypervisor is another name, another word for the technology that takes physical things and turns them into virtual things. Physical network card, RAM, processor, disk space, video, mouse, keyboard, you name it. All of that being virtualized anything, is really taking the physical stuff and making it into file-related stuff, if you will. These files is really where the magic is associated with VMware. It takes the collection of these files and makes this VM out of it, so that Windows thinks it's a real VM. Windows doesn't know the difference. Windows OS can't tell it's a virtual machine. And if it could tell, the whole point would be useless. Why have a virtual machine if it can tell us a VM? So inside of the files, and I want to walk you through the list of files here. The .vmxf file, which is the one that I've highlighted right now, that is the Foundry file associated with the virtual machine. Foundry file is in the format of an XML file, and I'll show you what this thing looks like. Let me open up. And it contains VMware virtual machine ID, and it contains some versioning information. Let me show you this file. This file right there. There you go. And let me make this thing a little bit bigger. So there is the VM ID right there, and the virtual machine name, box01-00.vmx. Now, VMX right here, this file is actually the configuration file associated with the VM. As far as VMware is concerned, that file is the executable. That's the file that executes, starts, stops, assigns CD-ROM, changes to RAM. Everything that goes on a configuration perspective of a VM goes inside of that file. This right here is a unique ID for the virtual machine. VMware recognizes the virtual machine with that ID. It doesn't care what name you give the VM. So that's the VMXF file. The next thing that I want to show you is this VMSD file. Now, VMSD file right now is empty. VMSD file is a snapshot disk file associated with a VM. The snapshot disk file. This one contains snapshot disk information, not the snapshot itself. It will say the name of the snapshot, how many snapshots there are, which snapshot you're on. It's going to contain that information, and that is also a text file. Right now it's 0 bytes because I haven't created a snapshot. And a snapshot is a point-in-time image associated with a VM. Right? And I'm going to be showing you what a snapshot looks like right now. I'm going to say new, say folder, and I'll create a folder, call it snap1. I'm going to click on the VM menu, go to snapshot, select take snapshot, call the snapshot works. I'll explain this a little bit later. And I'm going to go to my vCenter server, watch the snapshot being created. There it is. And it's going to take a couple of minutes to create the snapshot. But while it's creating, if I go over to my data store browser, which is right there, and I do a refresh right there, you will notice there's the VMSD file that is now 0.38K. And you also notice a 00001 VMDK file right there. Now this is something interesting. When a snapshot is created, the snapshot becomes the primary disk. And the disk that existed before the snapshot becomes the base disk that the snapshot is comparing against. Which means that if your base disk was set to be 4 gigs, maximum disk size, which is what mine is, because it's a Server 2003 box. How many of you remember Server 2003 when it was first released? Remember it? How many of you remember the minimum amount of disk space required to install the original version of Server 2003, which is what I have installed here? Do you remember how much disk space was required to install? No, 1.5 gigs. How much RAM was required to install Server 2003, the original one, before any of the service packs? How much RAM was, and by the way, Server 2003 was released in December of 2002. For what? Think about that. Do you know how much a gig was 12 years ago, 11 years ago?
2003.
That's correct. December 2003. The minimum amount of RAM required to run Server 2003 was 64 meg. 128 megs of RAM was suggested 256 megs of RAM was recommended. As a matter of fact, when Server 2003 was released, 9 gig, and 36 gig hard drives, hot swappable SCSI drives, were common. Who remembers that? Maybe you forgot. But yeah, you know, if you had 72 gig SCSI hot swappable disks back then, you spent some major money on your box, man. And 72 gig SCSI drives back then were 7,210K RPMs, and they costed a fortune. We were not in the 15K game. Here's another bit of trivia. Fiber. What was the speed at which fiber was available in 2002, 2003? Do you recall? High-speed fiber, 1 gig was available, yes. It had, what? No, not Ethernet, fiber. Fiber. Fiber was available at 4 gig. And fiber back then costed a fortune. You had no choice. If you really wanted the speed, you know, throughput, you had no choice but to get that fiber. In 2008, 2007, 2008, we went from 4 gig fiber to offering 8 gig fiber. And in 2010, we offer 16 gig fiber. But here's another bit of trivia. In 2002, 2003, we were already in the gigabit pipe on the Ethernet side. We had Cat 5e cables, you recall, and Cat 6 cables back then that allowed you to have 1 gig pipe on the Ethernet channel going across with 1 gig switches and such. And many organizations were converting in that route. Do you know the maximum speed Ethernet is available today? Available, not in use technically, but available. Do you know? 100 gig. 100 gigabit Ethernet is available today. Many organizations are already using 10 gig Ethernet. Maybe your organization is one of them. 10 gig Ethernet in the server room has become more and more commonplace. 40 gig Ethernet, it goes from 1 gig to 10 gig to 40 gig to 100 gig. And 100 gig is already being beta tested. I've already played with it in Europe. 40 gig Ethernet is available. It's expensive as all hell. I think 40 gig Ethernet switch, 40 gig Ethernet, I think it's 8-port switch, is like insane $3,000. You know, that nobody in their right mind would ever, you know, get. So fiber and Ethernet. The big benefit of going fiber is what? There's never any errors. It's either all or none, right? It's light. It's all or none. You're either going to get all the traffic or you're going to get none of it. Well, there's not going to be none of it because it's got to see the whole thing. So when fiber connects, how many of you played with fiber? Yeah? So when fiber connects, you see that little light, you're on. Live on 5. Ethernet is not that way. 10 gig Ethernet is going to give you approximately a 20%, 15 to 20% error rate. You will get 8 gig throughput pretty fast. And Ethernet substantially cheaper than getting fiber cables, and getting fiber switches, and getting a host bus adapter, and so on. iSCSI, anybody here play with iSCSI? Right? iSCSI, substantially cheaper than fiber-based storage, and works just as well for most purposes. So anyway, so I've got the VMSD file, and I'm going to download this file to show you. Download this file right on my desktop. Right there, right there. And there it is on my desktop. Minimize this, open up WordPad, and show you. And open this, and all documents, and the VMSD file on the desktop. VMSD file, this one right there. And okay, so this is the virtual machine snapshot, this VMSD config file. This is not where the snapshots are kept, but this is where you can tell. Current snapshot you're on is 1, and it'll also say total number of snapshots is 1. Now, when I'm coding, when I code my own PowerShell, PowerCLI components, I read these things. I grab this file, I import it into my little structure so I can find out what's going on with the VM. I read in the VMX file, and I know exactly what's going on. I don't even need to access the VMware SDK or write anything special to import and play with a text file. Anything will play with a text file. VMSN is a virtual machine snapshot file for the RAM, VMSN, and this works is the name of the snapshot that I created. This is my reference. VMware doesn't care what I name that thing. Right? So that's the work snapshot that I created. This is the name of the virtual machine snapshot, RAM snapshot that it took. Right. Let me take a break for a couple of minutes. I think people are screaming over here. Let me take a break for a couple of minutes. And come on. So I created a snapshot. And when I created a snapshot, and I specified that I wanted a snapshot that included my virtual machine memory. All right. Right here is my virtual machine snapshot RAM. And you notice that that RAM snapshot is taking up a gig of space, the .vmsn file. That VMSN file is taking up a little bit more than a gig, because when I select a snapshot and I select a take snapshot, I left this checkbox checked, the one that says snapshot the virtual machine's memory. What does that do? Well, when you snapshot the virtual machine's RAM, it saves the state of the VM. So whatever you were doing is saved. The other checkbox that says QuiESC, the guest file system, what that does is it puts the virtual machine on hold, exclusive lock, until the snapshot is completed, and then it releases a lock. So if you check that box and you say snapshot, the QuiESC, the guest file system, if you check that box and you take the snapshot, any transactions that are coming in, SQL Server transactions, AD transactions, any transactions coming into that machine will be denied, unless it's able to do multiple pings or multiple requests. But that will stay locked as long as the snapshot is happening, which may be a few seconds, right? So you want to be careful when you're doing that. But since I said snapshot of the virtual machine's memory, I got this gigantic VMSN file. I will take another snapshot of this machine without checking that box. It will not save the state of the VM, and you'll notice the size of the VMSN file will be 2730K, not meg, K, because it doesn't store the RAM, snapshot of the RAM. Okay, so we had the VMSD file, and then we had, this is the VSWP. The VSWP file is a swap file associated with the VM. Swap file will not exist here if what? Not a trick question. Snapshot, the swap file will not exist if what? The virtual machine is not powered on. That's simple. Not a trick question. Virtual machine is powered off, swap file is not there. All right? Then there is this VMX LCK and VMX tilde along with VMX. Those three files combined, the tilde and the lock, means that it makes certain that the virtual machine settings can only be manipulated by one person at a time. You can have multiple VM admins. You can have multiple people editing the virtual machine contents. That makes certain that only one person's setting gets saved, and that settings, when two people say OK at the same time, they don't collide or get an error. That's all. Right? The VMX file right here, if I download this and I want to show you that setting, I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to open up this VMX file right there. Now this file contains all of the settings associated with the virtual machine. There you go. There's a whole lot of them. So in this file is where you will see, let me take you down to something you can hear. Here's a CD-ROM image, and right now this machine has the W2K3 ISO file attached to it. Right there, for example. And if I move this over to the left, and I go down further, I'll see other settings like the network card that I've got associated with this. That I got a SCSI hard disk, and here's a name of the hard disk that is active right now. The fact that it says 00001 means that I am using a snapshot associated with this, and I'm using Windows Enterprise version. And there's the BIOS. There's a BIOS signature and location signature, CPU, and all that. So all of these settings associated. Here's a MAC address associated with the NIC, the virtual NIC that I've got associated with that, blah, blah, blah. So all these settings are here. And when I make changes to the virtual machine settings, they get changed here in the VMX file. And as far as VMware is concerned, VMX is really the execution file associated with the virtual machine. When VMware is looking for a file that it's going to use to read in the settings, start the VM, this is going to be it. All right? It will take effect, yes. So the right way to modify this would be to go to the VM and go to Edit Settings and manipulate it to the GUI. Right? VMware recommends that you don't manipulate the VMX file manually unless, of course, you know a specific way, specific reason on why something went wrong and why you can't modify it here. So you are liable to goof things up, yeah.
I've actually had to do that before with a piece of software that was licensed to a specific MAC address. And although VMware does like certain extent, editing the VMX is not fully set the MAC address.
And MAC addresses, what he's talking about, you're able to assign a network card, a static MAC address. The reason it's grayed out right now is because the virtual machine is running. That automatic or manual specification right here, if you select manual, it will force you to specify a MAC address that starts either with 005056 or 000C29, which are the two registered MAC addresses. So if you have a specific MAC address that is licensed to a virtual machine, you'd have to go in the VMX file and manipulate it there and not here. So that's what he was talking about. So unless you have a specific reason, don't do anything using the GUI. Using the text file or the manual configuration. Okay, so you got the swap file, the LCK file, the VMX tilde file. Here's an NVRAM file. Now, NVRAM file is the BIOS emulation. It's a Phoenix BIOS emulation. Right? So virtual machine gets BIOS like everything else. The .vmdk. This is something interesting, and for those of you that haven't played with virtual machines and VMware enough, will find this interesting too. Watch what happens when I do box 01-00 star.vmdk. It'll bring up 4 files. Any day now. Oh, come on. This is supposed to be quick. There. Okay. So notice there's a -flat.vmdk, that's this file right there, and the .vmdk, that's this file right there, -delta.vmdk and .vmdk. Now here's the thing. These .vmdk files are what are known as descriptor files. They're text files. Let me download the descriptor file for the primary hard disk and show it to you. It contains geometry information associated with the virtual hard disk. Open this file up. Right there. Down here. And no, down here. Come on. Come on. Star.vmdk. Really? I didn't download it? Thought I did. Right click, download, desktop, okay. Okay, where did I download it to before? probably. Okay, I want to save this. Okay, so here is the .vmdk file, the descriptor file. As you can see from the top, the descriptor file. Right? This is the text file associated with the original hard disk, right here, the -flat.vmdk. -flat.vmdk is the actual hard disk. In this case, it's 8 gigs in size. If you really want to mess with somebody, change that RW to R, shut down the machine, change that RW to R, restart it. It'll be a read-only file. The machine will never start. I've done that before. It's a good way to piss off developers and their test machines. It doesn't work, man. Yes, it does. And then you go change it and go to their desk. What's wrong? Dude, you did something. No, I didn't do anything. So this is the descriptor file, and as you can see, it contains, if it's thin provisioned or not, the head sector, cylinders, adapter types. It's all geometry information and other specific ID information associated with the disk. Every hard disk that you create, every virtual hard disk you create in VMware is going to get 2 files. One will be the descriptor, and the other one will be the hard disk. In my case, the reason I see 4 files, is because I took a snapshot. Snapshot also creates a descriptor and the hard disk. Now, the snapshot hard disk is going to have the -delta instead of the -flat, and they'll be sequentially numbered from 0001 to whatever, however many snapshots you've taken. So here's a question. Is snapshots a good way to do backups? No. Oh, no. Don't do it. Let me explain this in practical terms. Let's say you have a mail server like Exchange, and you take a snapshot at 9 a.m. At 1 p.m., the mail server dies. Your brain says, bring the snapshot back. You bring the snapshot back from 9 a.m. What did you just do? You lost 4 hours worth of mail. Pretty big thing in and of itself. But what else did you do? Exchange, for those of you that know messaging and Exchange, Exchange is tightly integrated with DNS, Active Directory, IIS, and of course, the internal EDB, the messaging database itself. You just broke everything. Furthermore, if you have messaging servers that are front-end servers, you know, the ones that are operating as connection servers, you jacked up your peer mail servers in a big way really fast. So the proper way to bring mail servers, database servers, Active Directory domains, the proper way to bring them back is to restore from a backup. The right way. So why are snapshots good? Well, snapshots are great. I take a snapshot at one point right now. I apply a service pack. By the way, this is all done offline, never in production. This is another mistake I've seen people make. It's a snapshot. I'm applying a service pack. If it doesn't go well, I'll just revert it. No! Take a snapshot, take care of your service pack, and then if the service pack doesn't do what you think it should do, bring it back. But that's your test machine. If things fall apart, it doesn't matter. So take a snapshot and trash it at the very latest a few hours later. Unless you're using it to prototype or to build or to test. Because prototyping machines, test machines, you can go on building for a while. I know, as well as you know, if you're building an infrastructure from scratch at your desk, which you can do, right? I can use VMware Workstation. I can use Oracle VirtualBox. And I can build an entire network at my desk using my laptop. I don't need anything else. Go play as much as you want. Create a snapshot just so you have versioning information. You can go back to things very easily. That's not a problem, but don't mimic that in production. It's a much bigger issue bringing a snapshot back from a few hours ago, especially if it contains mutating data, like any database would. This is another common misconception. It's a web server. What kind of data does it have? Oh, don't get me started. How much is web server at the very least? How much is web server caching, buddy? Huge problem if you take a snapshot of a web server, even if it's IIS, at a few hours ago and you bring it back a few hours later. And your brainiac thought process says, oh, it is not part of a domain. Yes, it is. It's a member server. Oh, it's not integrated with a database. Yeah, it is. It's integrated with an internal database that's holding all the cache and the config info. Well, users will simply reconnect once I bring the snapshot back. No. All the session information just died. So you're creating headaches. But the hyphen deltas are snapshot disk files. The .vmdks are descriptors. Every disk that you create will get a descriptor and will get a associated hard disk file. Delta simply means they're using a snapshot. Now, if I go to the VM directory and I go to Edit Settings, if I go to the VM menu and I go to Edit Settings, and I go to Hard Disk 1, look right here. The active hard disk is 00001.vmdk. That's what tells me that the hard disk right now is the snapshot disk. The other indicator that this is a snapshot, other than that name, is I am unable to change the size of the disk. If that was not a snapshot, I'd be able to change the size of that disk. I'm going to tell you one step further associated with that. Let me cancel out of this. Let me go to the VM menu, go to Snapshot, go to Snapshot Manager, right there. Trash all the snapshots, yes. Trash the snapshots. Go over to my data store browser. Right here is a trash in the snap. It's done. Go to the data store browser and watch what happened. Box 001 refresh. Now notice my hyphen deltas are gone. Type of the file. Okay. I have the VMDK. Now this is the summary of the hyphen flat file and the descriptor file. The only way you get to see all the files is if you go to the search menu and you search it the way I do. Okay. I'm not a big fan of that interface. Why don't you just put a checkbox there that lets me see everything? You know. So 1.2 gig of the total 4 gig has been eaten up by the Windows OS. Right. This is the original Server 2003 OS without any of the service plans. All right. Then we have the VMX file, which you saw. I told you that NVRAM. Now, NVRAM file is a biosimulation, and it is not a text file. It is a encrypted biosimulation that you can't manipulate in text. Then there's this VMware log file. VMware log file contains, this is also a text file. It contains information about, it contains information about the virtual machine log every time that it was booted, every time the virtual machine was started or restarted. So if I open this thing up, you can't really see or learn much from it, but I will tell you how you can use it. So if I take a look at the log file, I go right here, and I go to the desktop, and I go down to the log file, right here, no, VMware log file, and I'll show you the stuff that's in it. There you go. Right. So this is the kind of stuff that the log file records. Every time the virtual machine is started or restarted, VMware creates a new log file. VMware keeps track of up to 20 log files. VMware.log is the most recent log file. VMware-1 to VMware-19 are the old log files. So here's an easy question. Simply by looking at my whole reason for explaining the directory structure to you. If you were just looking at the directory structure, like these files right here, and by the way, many times when I'm traveling, I'm at airports. My clients tell me all the time, hey, Rafiq, something machine doesn't work. And I always tell them, hey, go to the data store browser, take a picture of the directory with your phone, and text me the directory picture because I'm unable to log on. I'm boarding the plane. By looking at the directory structure, if you noticed that the swap files weren't there, and there were 5 or 6 log files, if you notice 5 or 6 log files within a few minutes of each other, and the swap file was not there, what would you conclude? Swap file isn't there, and there are 4 or 5 log files within minutes of each other. It's been rebooting, and it's not started right now. Somebody's been messing with it. That's without even logging on to anything. You're able to conclude that. And then, of course, from that point, you can take a look at the task, you can take a look at the events, figure out what's going on. Who started it, who logged on, and who's doing what, so you'll be able to interrogate the environment. All right, going back to the virtual machine, right here. No, Server 2008 box. I'll show you something else. Here. Open. Okay. Now this is my 2008 machine. Let me log. There we go. And right now, this machine has. Notice this machine has 2 gigs of RAM. Can you see it? It has 2 gigs of RAM. This is the Server 2008 R2 box Data Center Edition 64-bit. As of vSphere 4.0 and later, as long as you use the supported operating systems, you're able to manipulate RAM and processor while the machine is running. And they've perfected this quite a bit. And what I mean by perfected it, they've made it, they finessed it a lot. So Windows OS doesn't shut down, goof up, freeze up, which it used to do. If you really, which it used to do. In 5.5, 5.5, 5.155, they've done a great job at this. So I'm going to increase the RAM from 2 gig to 3 gig while this box is running. And oh, by the way, I'm going to open up Command Prompt. I just want to see something. I've got, this is IP address of 175. I'm going to go to the Command Prompt over here, and I'm going to do ping 192.168.1.175T. So, I've got, who else hates Windows Firewall? Piece of crap. Poke holes in it just to get it to work. No, I don't think so. Why are they called tables? Because that's what it is. Here. All right, so there I'm pinging it. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go to the VM menu. No, I'm going to close out of this thing here. And go back here. And there's the 2 gig, and I'm going to go to the VM menu, and I'm going to go to Edit Settings, and I'm going to up the RAM from 2 gig to 3 gig. Right there. And I'm going to click OK. Done. Let's take a look at what's happening here. I'm pinging. I haven't lost. Oh, I got a timeout, and there I go. I go back here. Close this. Go over here. Right click. Properties. 3 gig. Now I can do the same thing to the processor. Now the way you know that this machine has 1 processor is because if it had more than 1 processor, right over here on the right next to 2 gigahertz, it would say 2 processors or 3 processors or 4 processors. So I'm going to click on the VM menu, go to Edit Settings, go to Processors, CPU, and I'll up the processors by 1, 2, and OK. And let's go over here, pinging, and request timeout. There it goes again. I'm going to close this, click over here, right click on computer, go to Properties, and look at here we go. So there are other few things that I want to tell you about associated with the VM. So you saw me really jack up the VM here. Yeah, nice try. Okay. Now, a few other things. Inside of my box, I can convert the virtual machine. I can convert the VM back to a virtual machine right here, like so. Next. Come on. Next. Finish. And there's a virtual machine right back. All right? And I'm going to power this thing on. All right. What I want to show you here inside of configuration and networking, I build my entire network structure. Come on, man. I build my entire network structure. This is a default network. I build the structure using command line, and I save the script, and I build it, and I create this management network at the Linux command line on the server using PuTTY, and I'm gonna click, trash that, blah blah blah. Open up PuTTY, go to my host. 1, 2. Okay, root. My password. Make this thing a little bit bigger. Go to change settings. Click on appearance. Click change. Make this thing a little bit bigger so you guys can see. That's good. And smaller. Smaller. And I'm going to move this here, here, and my PuTTY session is right there. Now watch, I'll have to refresh this. Freaking. Now I'm going to build an internal only switch right there. I'm going to build the internal only switch. An internal only switch is the one that is not going to be connected to a NIC the way this one is. And then I will connect it to a NIC after the fact. So I'm going to create a second one of these switches. I'm going to create vSwitch 1, and I'm going to not connect it with a network adapter. So I'm going to make it an internal only switch. And I normally set these scripts up it would help if I named it the right way. Okay, so right here, if I do a refresh, look down, come on, there you go. There's my internal only switch with no port groups associated with it. Right? Then I'm going to associate, I'm going to create a virtual machine port group right here. Do a refresh, watch. It's going to call production, virtual machine port group. Then I'm going to create I'm going to see this where it says no adapters. I'm going to refresh this. Right? So now I'm going to trash this, say like that, and it's going to remove the, the switch and everything. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my Linux environment, and I'm going to go over to, I'm going to create a folder called scripts, like that. And I'm going to do a vi make SW. Just a second. Yeah, so make SW. And I'm going to write that up. I'm going to say ESXEFG, vSwitch A, vSwitch 1, ESXEFG, vSwitch capital A, production, vSwitch 1, ESXEFG, vSwitch, oops, I don't know how to spell, vSwitch, link it to vmnic1, vmnic1, and vSwitch 1, vSwitch 1, vSwitch 1, vSwitch 1, create. So this is going to create the internal only switch. This will create the production virtual machine port group. This will link it with a network card, the VMNIC1. I'm going to save this. Oops, maybe I should learn how to do that. Come on. Ah. No help. Wait. VMNIC1, V, switch 1. Delete, delete, delete. Go down. Trash. VMNIC1, V, switch 1, L. Save it. And then I'm going to chmod my file like that, like that. Don't I not have that file? Where did I create it?
I don't think you saved it.
You're not much help. Let's try that again. Make SW and ESXCFG V switch A V switch 1 ESXCFG V switch capital A production V switch 1 ESXCFG V switch L VMNIC1 V switch 1. Saved. LS, there it is. And then I'm going to do chmod 7. Come on, man. Make SW. Make SW. Thank you. Let's go over here, do a refresh.
No. Why not run that to the Power CLI?
What's that?
Why not run that to the Power CLI?
And you can. Power CLI has the ability to do all of that. I'm trying to show you different ways to do the same thing. So here, I can say help port. And I have got the ability to create virtual machine port group. See it? VD switch, VD port group, virtual port group, remove port group.
Okay, just an easier to...
No, not easier, just different. I wanted to show you different things. Yeah, just different. I could have done it just as easily over here, but he didn't like Power CLI, so I switched over to Linux.
Okay. Power CLI.
Yes, it is. Sits on top of PowerShell. Yeah. So Power CLI gives you all the power associated with the Windows PowerShell environment, which, by the way, and I can hopefully impart my PowerShell wisdom here that I really like. I want to show you a couple of things inside of PowerShell. And remember, everything you have in PowerShell, you have access to in Power CLI, because Power CLI is built on top. I'll go over here, click OK. I'm going to show you something fun. Now, I'm going to create, just a second. I'm going to create a file. In my file I'm going to call it user list CSV. So let's say that I'm going to get a file that is filled with usernames and AD domains or whatever the case is, and I want to suck in that file in PowerShell, and I want to create new users in AD based on it. And you know, the CSV file format is the one that is widely accepted. So watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to say username, and in the second column I'm going to say zip code. And I'm going to say T Cruz 90210, A Whitman 33606, and then John Candy, man, he's been dead a while, 66201. And I'm going to save this. I've got 3 users, and I've got 2 columns, username and zip code. Now, in Power CLI, I'm able to do this. I'm going to say user list equals, and I'm going to say I'm going to say import CSV, user list CSV. And by the way, that would be just as fast if I was using a 1 gig file or a 2 gig file. It's instantaneous. And I can do something else that's interesting. Let me open up a couple of notepads. Now, have you had services that have been running inside of your Windows environment that you want to kill, but you have other services that with a similar name that you want to keep? And you have to, well, sometimes you end up restarting the machine because you don't know of an easier command line way to do that. Now, in PowerShell, here I've got, four notepad windows open. And here I've got, minimize that, I'll show you something. So look in the background. I want to keep the window that says user list. Okay. Get process notepad. It says, all right, here are my notepad processes. I've got 4 of them. I'm going to say, that doesn't tell me much. I want you to tell me the ID, the main window title, and I want you to tell me, no, that's good enough. And I want you to do format table, auto, so I can see it. Okay, so here are my IDs. 13172 is the user list Windows process that I want to save. So I can do this. I can say get process, notepad. And I want to say where ID is not equal to 13172. And let me list this first. So these are the other notepads. Oh, I didn't say it right. Where the ID is not equal to, oh, that's why. Let's try that again. ID, current ID is not equal to, there we go. So this is listing me notepads where the ID is not equal to 13172. And the 13172 is the notepad process. 13172 is the one that's a user list. That's going to be this notepad right there. All right, so I'm going to go back up to it. ID is not equal to 13172, this one right here. And I'm going to say, other windows are gone. The one that I want up stays up. And I know this was childlike, but if these were hundreds of processes that inside of a box that you wanted to maintain, I could show you something that is very, very valid. If I do get process SVC host, right? This can be the bane of your existence, right? You've seen some of these. What the hell is all this crap? You've seen these, right? What is this thing doing? Well, let me pick one. I'm going to pick this one, 1152. And I'm going to say I want to know more about the 1152 get process ID 1152. And I want you to do format list, show me everything. And I want you to export it in XML format inside of the scripts directory in XML format. And when I go to the scripts directory and I look at this XML file, watch. This is listing everything PowerShell is able to tell me about that process. Look at that bar on the right. That will tell you the amount of information I'm able to get in an XML file about that process. And it will list me all the DLLs, every single aspect that it is hitting. So I can interrogate SVC host and do what I like. I can find out what's happening. Now there's another, inside of PowerShell, there's another great thing that I can do, which I can do relatively easily. Inside of here, if I open up a new script, I'm going to say, who remembers VBScript? Right? For those of you that maybe played with it, kind of, right? Now, VBScript did not have the backing of the .NET framework, and as a result, it had to use WMI to interrogate the box. WMI is Windows Management Instrumentation. And when it used WMI to interrogate the box, it had to do something like this. It had to grab, if I wanted to find out instances of Win32 network adapter, and I'm going to find out the name of the network adapter, and I'm going to save this as that. Okay. Now what this is going to do is it's going to interrogate the network adapter on the machine that I'm on, and it's going to tell me based on WMI package, it's going to interrogate it and tell me the names of the network adapters that it finds using this provider. Now if I ran this, if I said C scripts, run this, here are the list of network adapters on my box. Now this is great. Maybe I want this and I want to do something with it. The problem is not this list. The problem is that code. I can't explain that code to anybody. However, in PowerShell, I can do this. Same list. Which one would you rather explain to somebody? 1 line, 4 lines. Same result. Yeah. And by the way, side by side, this is not an exaggeration. 10, 15, 20 lines of normal VB scripting code equates to a line of PowerShell code. You can also integrate C# and VBNet code directly inside of PowerShell and run it using your own list. So it is really, really powerful. You can use the entire .NET framework and access any component you like within your PowerShell script.